Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 104 with Benji Bakshi, DP of Season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Enjoy.
I think I go through periods of surrounding myself with inspiration and periods where I allow myself to be decidedly uninspired externally, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Stay in my own headspace. So I'm realizing as you ask the question that I'm in one of those internal states because of the strike and the slowdown, and I was just prepping season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So we were deep in that, and I was in Toronto with my family, sort of ready to be Canadian for an extended period, and then we packed up and moved back.
Oh, jeez.
So definitely unwinding.
Yeah, I get the same. Like, I'll go through periods of to be fair, I don't do a lot of reading fiction, but I'll go through periods of deep, what I would call research periods, which oftentimes are just fuck around periods. But I want to absorb, and then same thing where it's you'll go months just going, that makes me feel ill. It's like being awake too long. You're like, I don't need that anymore.
Yeah, sometimes you just want to know that your instincts are yours and whatever you've digested is ready to filter its way through or not. I will say something I saw recently, because I have a 4-year-old who's just entranced by anything Spider-Man.
Sure.
I brought him to see the Spider-Verse 2 in the theater, which was his first theatrical experience ever.
Oh, well, fuck.
And he saw the first one, which he loved. The second one, was even more expressive. I really loved, beyond the sort of high intensity of it, they would just paint the rooms differently in each shot. This is how the characters are feeling. I was like, that's a really great sense of freedom where you can just really make up the rules as you go.
Yeah.
And I was actually inspired by that, the visuals are giving you something at every turn.
Yeah, that film must have been so hard for them to make, because the first one, everyone harps so aggressively on the animation, and when you go back and watch that first one, it feels kind of tame now. It's got 2 tricks, and this one has 107 tricks.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was fun.
Yeah. That photo of her, or that scene of her dad standing there when he's going to call it in, and he's trying to arrest her, just the way that painting, I guess, really stuck with me for whatever reason. That was a very powerful frame they put together.
Watching that immediately gave me the takeaway of, it feels almost AI generated.
Right.
It's that it was just so complex. And it was an interesting thing to even say to myself that I think with AI tools, I don't know if you've messed around with them at all.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You're basically layering additional creativity on top of what you already have. So I think that everything visual, and in a way everything narrative, the bar is going to get pushed up even higher, because if you were ever constrained by your own imagination, that's going to get blown wide open.
Yeah. Well, the one that I've started toying with right now, that I it sucks to say, because I should have thought of this before I saw it, but speaking of ingesting and digesting, is using the Photoshop generative fill for outpainting. So you shoot, instead of doing what would traditionally be a what do you call it, with the glass? I'm blanking on the name. When they would paint the glass, matte painting. You just put, I just did it with this shot, because I'm like, what if I want to make my apartment look interesting? And I just cut out me and told generative fill to make me a cool apartment. And it gave me 20 options of different ways that this edge could be cool, or you could make it smaller and paint out a whole relatively realistic looking scene, as long as it's locked off. So that's been something I've been fucking around with sometimes.
Yeah, I think with those things, the first application is always, let's do what we've already been doing and see if we can do it faster and cheaper and easier. And then when you get to that point, I think that the audience starts to pick it apart and say, hey, that looks like generative fill. How can I make sure that I show that it's something real or custom, or, I mean, real is now a different word, but how can I show that I put more creative energy into it, or it feels more organic or more human? And that's what the audience is probably going to want to see. So another example is on Strange New Worlds, we're shooting on the volume.
I was going to get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. We're always trying to put a lot of energy into making sure that the volume doesn't become apparent. So we want it to feel, we want to shoot it in a way where it feels like it's a background, and light it in a way where it all feels integrated. And there's a blend line between the physical set and the virtual set. And we need to always put a lot of care into making sure it's properly blended. So it's the same thing. You have a new technology, but it doesn't solve everything. It's still, even now, 100 and however many years later, from the first moving images, you're still trying to suspend disbelief.
Yeah. And it's also, you know, to your point about like, oh, you could point out that that's generative fill, you know, like Mid-Journey seems to have a look, but the volume does seem to have kind of a look. I don't know if it's all of us just, you know, obsessing over when The Mandalorian did it, and now we all kind of can pick out the faults in the same way that I guess you could say, oh, that was shot on film because of whatever halation, gate weave, you know, grain that is different or certain colors, but like versus digital. But the volume does at this moment tend to have kind of a look you know.
Well, when people are running around in 100-foot diameter circle, they're probably in there. But, you know, we've been trying to use it for interiors and things that are non-intuitive, and have sets that are, especially moving forward as we're preparing new season, sets that are not the shape of the volume, you know, because you might immediately think, let's get as much room as we can, but we're basically trying to mix it up because the audience is becoming more aware of that, and there's a tendency being propagated throughout the industry within the volumes, but also just to keep further enhancing the experience. That like, so, as little as you can tell it's been shot there, the better.
Well, I remember in The Mandalorian, the one that caught me off guard, and I think this is kind of what you're talking about, is the first season when, you know, Mando goes to talk to Werner Herzog, and they're in this like little Imperial bunker. And I thought that was just an interior, but that's like all it was the table, and the rest of it was volume. And I was like, that blew my mind, because I was like, I didn't realize we were doing that. So that kind of sounds like what you're thinking about.
Right. Yeah, there's a couple of sets in Strange New Worlds, which I don't even want to give it away, but when I first had access to see some material, I didn't think they were on the volume at all. And like their interior sets that were. I was like, oh, well done, you know?
So your episode, well, so I don't know when this discussion is actually going to air, but at the time that we're recording this, episode 4 just premiered last night. And I watched that, and that was one of your episodes, correct?
Yeah.
Fucking wonderful timing for me, because I'm already watching the hell. Like, I love the show. I think it's the best Star Trek since Next Generation. Having a lot of fun with it, so I was already planning on watching it at midnight, and then I was like, oh great, I'm talking to this guy tomorrow. But so obviously, like, the outside of the planet, the exterior was volume, but in what's his name, Luke, in his hut, is that volume?
No,
that's an interior. Okay, good.
It's an interior with like a sliver of blue screen out the front door. But that was practically built on a stage.
Okay, because that was going to blow my mind if you did that one, because that's the only one I could think of. Is there any more on that episode, or is it just that exterior?
It's the exteriors that are like when they're in the quarry,
Right.
manual labor. That's also on the volume. No, it's whenever you see that snowy landscape.
Okay, cool.
The castle was all practical.
Well, that was something that was kind of cool about being able to talk to you with this specific episode coming out, is because the episode has like 5 or so locations that are all, we could dive into each one of them to talk about like lighting and like it starts off in Pike's quarters and then goes to like a meeting room, and then you've got the bridge, and then you've got the volume planet, and you've got the castle interior. Like those all, I have notes on my phone somewhere. I did want to kind of go through each one and talk about like how you've gone through, because I've talked to a couple guys who shot Picard, and they were talking about bridge lighting and stuff like that. But Strange New Worlds has it feels like a lot more built-in lighting. How much are you relying on the interior lighting and just like putting in a key, or are you doing a lot of like external or extra film lights?
The answer to that question is there's 2 answers. There's every other set except the bridge, and then there's the bridge.
Gotcha. Okay.
Every other set except the bridge first, which is we rely on the built-in lighting a lot. And this was something that Glenn Keenan, who shot the pilot and a lot of the first season, and he came from a Star Trek Discovery background too. Right. He they put a lot of energy into designing that, and our lighting designer Alita was instrumental in that too, and working with the production designer Jonathan Lee. They had a really great collaboration in trying to really embed as much as we could everywhere. You've got channels and tables underlighting people, and then you've got front light and top light all around the sets, and these architectural elements that we call ribs that sort of punctuate these larger rooms. They have strips of lighting on top and in the side and things like that. So when I first joined the show, which was season 2, the great thing about coming in on season 2, which I had never done before, all my other shows, I came in season 1, and we had to sort of break the ground. But in season 2, the fortunate thing for me, figuring out the volume, which every show does the volume a different way, and figuring out all the possibilities of these sets, they had done a lot of the R&D.
Sure.
And it didn't mean that I was locked into established looks, because the cool thing about this show is almost every episode is a new genre, and we have a lot of freedom to just do whatever we think fits the story. So, I walked into these sets and Glenn was like, okay, you've got 4 million LEDs embedded into these sets. Good luck.
Have fun. Yeah. Your dimmer hoppers, Greg.
If I ever felt like I had too many options, that was it. Where does light come from and where does it not come from? And so I would spend a lot of time before I even shot my first episode turning things on and off. And I think I was driving, we have 2 gaffers on the show because they're alternating with us. I think I was driving them and the board ops nuts. Like, whoa, okay, we just thought that, but we'll try this one now. Oh, what if this is cooler? And this is, and I just had to see it all to know what was possible, instead of start with a look from season 1 and go from there. There's literally like too many numbers to paint by to change, that it was literally better to just turn it all off and start turning them on one at a time. Yeah. So now I've got some Benji looks from certain episodes and know that I can start from here or there. And there was a particular day in one of the episodes that at the end of it, it was a good day, like felt like we did good work and accomplished everything. And the gaffer came up to me and said, congratulations, you pitched a no-hitter. And I said, what does that mean? Yeah. And he says, yeah, you didn't even realize it. You didn't put any lights on the floor. You didn't put a single light stand. I said, oh yeah, I didn't do that. So that was pretty cool when I finally sort of got the grasp of things. And it's not to say that that's the proper way to shoot this show. But it just turns out that, I had finally been comfortable enough and had the instincts enough to be able to do it when we need to.
Well, and that sounds like a huge, huge kudos to the production designers.
Absolutely.
Or department.
Yeah. And that is refreshing that there's a big synergy there, that we want light to exist certain places, and they're doing everything they can to enable that. And it not only just helps the show and helps the look, but it enables us to do shots that we probably just couldn't do. In the past, I would probably have to set a light and have it painted out, which is a huge, trouble. It's cost money, and everybody's got to be involved and okay it. But now we just have the ability to light from the ship, as we say, whenever needed. So there's that, and then there's the bridge. And the bridge is basically borrowed, I believe, from early Discovery or something like that.
Oh, really?
I don't know where it was borrowed from, but it was borrowed. It was altered, and we basically have to light it like we jokingly say, the nightly news. There's all kinds of lights up in a grid surrounding this thing. There's a softbox there, but then there's lights below the softbox, because there's just not great ways to get light other places. There's consoles. When people are at the consoles, we have embedded lighting there, and we generally can do a good job. It's a little more moody in the bridge, especially in like a red alert or something, right. But it's tough. And when I see it compared to the other sets, it feels like a more dated look, where people just got a movie light on their face. So you sort of embrace it, because that's maybe where the throwback vibe comes in. There's even things like, there's a center ceiling architecture, and Captain Pike's chair isn't even under that. It's like perfectly not under it. And it's difficult to get light on him, even though you would think the set would be built so that he could get a lot of great light.
Right.
So the bridge is definitely a love-hate relationship, and it's absolutely surrounded by blue screen on like 180 degrees of it. So we're always counting shots. How many VFX shots can we do, and try to avoid the big blue screen. It's like, all right, well, what kind of angle can we get?
Right.
So that's my answer to, do we use embedded lighting? And it's yes, absolutely everywhere, including the volume, except the bridge.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing about the bridge too that I noticed, I just forgot I had my notes, was that like around the doors, there's like these, I don't know if they're pulsing or if they're moving, but there's like 2 or 3 spotlights, I don't know what you want to call them, that seem to just constantly ping the lens. Like they alternate just hitting the lens. Are those movers, or are they just getting more intense?
Those are MR16s embedded into articulating but not moving pictures. So they're dimmed to various levels, timing, and that is basically like the icing on the cake of every single shot. That's like,
right.
Okay, we're going to light the character. Now we're in MR16 mode. And it's funny because they're so specific. There's so many of these fucking things. And then any that are off camera, I'm like, okay, we got to turn those off, because they're just going to blast shadows and do weird things. Especially when you're in a moving shot. It took me an episode or two to realize, okay, we got to cue these, because they're just so complicated. Why would you want light coming from weird places in really spotty ways?
Right.
But they're there to flare the lens. They're also really interesting backlights or accent lights. So when Pike is sitting in the chair, you've got 2 or a couple places some of those MR16s can really nail him as a backlight, which can be cool, because that gives them a sort of heroic feel, but then it turns off. So there's that. And I've got to the point where I'm the one going over and hand articulating every single one to be like, I want this one to hit here. I want this one to back Ortega's when she does that. And so it's funny because the gaffer, their names are Dan and Hugh, and they joke about how, oh yeah, Glenn does that too, right. And look, he's got to be the one to go do these little specials, because you've got so many options. You're sort of figuring them out as you do it. and they get really hot. I'm always burning my hand on them because they're tungsten.
Right. Yeah, it's funny, I keep quoting a DP I interviewed. He was like the 5th interview I did 3 years ago, Alejandro Mejia, and he had quoted one of his teachers as saying, if you have 2 lights, you have 2 problems. If you have 1 light, you have 1 problem. And it sounds like you are just surrounded by problems.
When I first got on the show, I was definitely, I felt genuine anxiety. I hadn't shot an episode yet, and I was there in prep, there to sort of absorb a lot of things. And I had this feeling of like, there's light everywhere.
Right.
Like, how do I make sure it doesn't look like there's light everywhere? There is, but you don't want it to feel like your characters are lit that way. So a lot of head scratching. And yes, it always comes down to like 1 light, 1 purpose. And I'm finally familiar enough that when you have basically like 50 different sources, what are they all doing?
Right. The one that comes to mind is the hallways, but definitely the hospital set seems, it's just white, everything's white. How do you work within those, confines? How are you getting contrast in the image, or are you even trying? Like, how are you keeping that looking, quote unquote, cinematic?
Yeah, we're always trying. It can be negative, Phil. Sure. And at first I was like, let's turn this off. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much to turn off. Let's just put up a solid, let's just take care of that. Because even if you turn it off, the surfaces are kind of reflective and can push it back. There's that. And then you're hoping to stage scenes around certain sources, like the sort of medical tables are all underlit. The chairs or beds that people lay on have a sort of halo over top, but there's also floor lighting underneath. We're using a lot of Astera products with
every single interview without. I'm just going to do a supercut of everyone saying, and then we use the tubes.
Totally. We use diffusion boxes. I fell in love with one called the V box. From Matthews, which to me just had the perfect form factor. It wasn't too big. Some of these like 3 tube things are as big as a sky panel, and I'm like, well, it helps you in some regards, but not in the footprint.
Right.
So the V box was cool because you put 1 tube in, and it almost just like has like double the area, which is slightly softer, and it diffuses well. But we could still clip it onto things and make it really low profile. So we're basically taking the existing lighting, and once again, credit to the production designers and Alita Keenlyside, the lighting director or lighting designer, and Glenn, to set this up, where a lot of the built-in lighting has sections. So this side is brighter, the other side is darker, and you take it to a perceptible or imperceptible difference, but it shows up on camera.
Right.
So it shows up on the subject, rather. And the same thing with Pike's Quarters. You've got these little triangles in the ceiling, which make these sort of, postmodern shapes. And we call them chiclets, like little pieces of gum. And you can really get away with a lot up there. Like take one section to 100%, so it's hitting one side, and take the other ones down to like 8% or whatever the lowest level is to keep them from flickering. And you've got a huge lighting contrast that when you aim the camera at it, maybe you could see it, but you're usually not looking at it because they're all illuminated. So you can sort of hide contrast in different places. Same thing with the under light from tables. You can really pump one side and slow down the other. So that's how I start. It's really turn things off, see where we can push light. And if we have to, the last resort is put a light on a stand.
Right. I was going to say that, do you know what the inbuilt lighting is? Are they just like LED ribbons, or are they using specific fixtures built into the set?
I believe it's Moss LED products, which are made for embeds. So I think that's what they used a lot of.
Gotcha.
And our strips, and sometimes I think they're little panels.
Sure. Do you know, were you guys using any, I kind of cut you off when you said Astera products. Did you just mean the tubes? Because I know they have, we never talk about the little bulbs they have or the little square panels. They come out with a bunch of new stuff.
I think we use everything at a certain point. We're using the little pucks, as we call them. We're using their essentially little, what do you call them? PAR equivalents.
Yeah.
We really use a lot of them depending on the needs. And it's true with a lot of, other things too. We're getting into cream source.
Oh, the vortexes are so good.
Yeah, they really are.
I got one over there.
Solving a lot of problems for people. We also use Felixes. And then we're using movers too, because again, Alita, our lighting designer, comes from a sort of rock and roll background. So she's got a full gamut of experience with a lot of different types of lighting. So one episode, we had something imposing a sort of active lighting outside the ship, and I wanted it to make its way through the windows. So we had a combination of Felix quads, pulsing, and also these esprits, moving fixtures with really intricate gobos, pushing in. So there was just this soft/hard melding, moving light happening.
Right.
And with the atmosphere, it was really, I think, pretty unique. So we're trying to, do space travel justice with lots of different lighting options beyond just put a 20K outside a big window, which we also do.
Sure. It is definitely, like I said, it's certainly my favorite of the Treks. And I think you guys really have built a very, I don't want to say unique in the sense that it's so wildly different than anything else, but it does have its own, it feels very much like its own thing while still staying within that universe.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's something that we worked really hard on, is the tone. And credit to the showrunners, Akiva and Henry, for knowing enough about Trek and pulling in a well-rounded team that also does that. We don't have a technical advisor on the show or anything, considering,
like a Star Trek expert or whatever.
Yeah, it's such a intricate fictional world but it's almost has more rules than a non-fictional world. I mean, we have, the Roddenberrys and everybody involved, Alex Kurtzman and his team. So the scripts get vetted, of course, right. But even for the details of the props, the costumes, and everything, we're all sort of weighing in. And there was a part where we were shooting an episode, and we had a technical question about canon or how something might work, and all we have to do is just ask, does anybody know if? And the crew just flocks in. And they're like, based on this episode of this and Trek Wiki and this and that. So everyone is holistically keeping each other in check.
I think Crescenzo, who shot Picard, said the same thing happened to him, where it was everyone on set was just huge Star Trek nerds, and they could fill in for him because he'd never watched the show.
Yeah, especially our, season 2. We shoot in Toronto, and that's where Discovery is also based. And so literally the schedules are coordinated where Discovery finishes, we go to Strange New Worlds, you go discover Strange New Worlds finishes, crew goes back to Discovery. So it's just long Star Trek life.
If you're a fan, I bet that's the greatest possible job. Finally, and I get 2 of them.
Exactly. Yeah, just nonstop.
Yeah, I did want to ask, with talk about the ship, obviously all the stuff's built in, but for last night's episode, today's episode, whatever you want to call it, that little miniature castle set, obviously no built-in lighting there. So I was wondering how you approached that both during the night scene and the day scene, because they both look very nice. I liked the kind of green fill warm key thing at night, the purple outside looked pretty cool.
We approached it by making the producers very sad because we had shit tons of lighting.
Yeah.
It may have looked sort of contained, but it was a huge cathedral, and it was extremely tall. So, the typical problem of, hey, we're shooting this cathedral which has lots of windows, and you'd think, well, hence natural light should do the job. But of course, movie schedules are what they are, and we have to protect for losing that light. And in fact, when we shot there, it was like snowy and cloudy. Welcome to Toronto.
Right.
And so we knew we had to protect for that. So we had, I don't know, like 5 or 6 LRX lifts, with just basically one big HMI per window. And that was on one side of this sprawling cathedral was going to be the quay side. And of course, there was a rotunda at the end where we sort of had to fill them all in. Then on we'll call it the fill side, we built scaffolding that was tented so that we wouldn't get any extraneous light. And we put sky panels in every window there, like a bunch of 360s and
right.
What are they called? 120s, things like that. So it was just a shit ton of light. And we had to outpower the natural light. At one point, the clouds broke and the sun just exploded into the rotunda, which looked cool, but it was a very different lighting level. And I'm pretty sure a lot of those takes made it into the cut. I was like,
oh, okay.
They got a lot of backlight, we'll just go with it, which is cool. And it was like flaring the lens and all kinds of stuff. I was like, all right, let's do it. Because we couldn't really change it. And it was like, are we going to sit here and wait forever?
Right.
We just went with it. And I did trust the post-production team that, like, if something is really out of whack, they're going to use the takes that make sense. For the night scene, it was the opposite. So our HMI side, what was the key side for the day stuff, we basically, dropped the level and we turned that into this magenta light that was this iconic color of the Rigel 7 sky.
Right.
And we got to show a night color, which I don't think was in the original series. They established this sort of maroon magenta mix for the night sky.
Because that was one thing they kept referencing, like last time we were, was that in canon in the original series? Because I didn't watch that.
That was the first episode ever.
Oh, okay.
Of Star Trek.
Not the. I love Star Trek, but I'm not the biggest fan.
Yeah. If you watch the original series, it's basically the pilot.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Captain Pike was
That's fucking cool then.
Yeah, Captain Pike was the captain in the first few episodes of the original series until he had this predestined thing happen to him. Spoiler, he gets like disfigured and is no longer able to serve.
Right.
So in Discovery season 2, our Captain Pike, is sort of reintroduced to this fate that he lives life knowing his fate.
I remember that. I did watch Discovery.
This is brought up in our series from time to time, that he's basically living with a death sentence, but he sort of, embraces it.
Yep, I remember now.
So Rigel's a big anxiety for Captain Pike that he returned to, and it's great I think fan service to return there and make more of it. So anyway, we had this red maroon thing going on. So our fill side of the cathedral with the sky panels, we then flipped to this color. So we had these kind of wild party colors streaming into this cathedral, and you can see that in the night scenes. And then we had 200 medieval style candles glowing in the background,
right? And
these like flame pots. So you've got like flame, magenta, red, maroon, and all this kind of stuff. So it was this very womb-like, kind of disturbing interior castle.
Well, because that was going to be my follow-up question: is how much play was all that fire doing? Were you augmenting the fire, or was that just let the candle do its work and leave it?
We were augmenting it. because of the size of the space. I love using natural firelight. On Bone Tomahawk, which was an indie feature I did a while ago. It's Western. I had experience with propane, flame in the past, and
Flame bars.
yeah, I was dead set on using that as much as possible. I want to light these scenes with flame because the flicker effect, is always very erratic, and no matter how many magic gadgets or sky panels or whatever you're
LEDs can't do it. No one's programmed a good flame effect.
The interesting thing about the flame bars is they'll blow around if there's any, slight wind and things, and they'll change their shape and hence become a harder source. But now they're softer, and it's really just organic and erratic. So I wanted to use as much natural flame light as I could to light the nights. And sometimes we were like dialing it up to 11 and getting the bars right on the edge of frame and doing what we had to. In this case, though, because of the inverse square law, they were just too far away.
Every cinematographer's fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
Inverse square law.
Talking physics.
Yeah.
We were using, LEDs to augment it, but I think it blended in pretty well because when you line up LEDs that have like slightly different patterns and there is natural flame light, I think it balances out.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't tell. That's why I asked. Was there, if I remember, there was like a green fill. Was that just like, hey, we're going to make green because it's the opposite of orange, or was there like a motivation that I missed for that?
We ended up, when we shot it, it was like extremely red because those were the colors. And in post, we basically wanted to dial some of that out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's really what happened. We didn't impose any green in camera.
Why? I'm going to have to go back and watch that then. Great job, color department. Because I literally thought you had like a green light behind him.
We had some coolness. That's what we had. We had some coolness to try and offset it. But I think we dialed that more green to fight some of the magenta because it just felt too magenta-y.
Yeah, the magenta and the warm probably get muddy.
Yeah, and that was sort of the struggle with establishing this sky color is you've got this total red warm palette and you have to offset it.
Yeah. Just checking. I'm looking at my notes again because I was like, we really went through all the spaceship stuff. I was like, Ortega's room. Oh, that was one thing. How do you approach daylight, what I would call daylight interior on the spaceship versus nighttime interior? Because that is that, but it's all technically nighttime.
That's what I was sort of conversation I was bringing up when I was digging in. I was like, well, day doesn't have to look like day and night doesn't have to look like night. So day and night, like for the circadian rhythm aspect of the crew is just sleeping hours and waking hours. What's outside the ship might just be empty space, but they're probably still going to have a daylight feel to their ship and they're going to have higher light levels. Usually in an episode, there's something outside the windows imposing something. So in episode 2, which was this courtroom episode, they were...
Great episode, by the way. Good job on that.
Thank you, yeah. The director I worked with, Valerie Weiss, we had worked together on 2 other shows, and they were asking me if I had any directors to recommend for Star Trek when they first came on, and she was really high up on my list, and they loved her. So they brought her in and we were reunited. And that was both of our first Star Trek episodes ever. We were the virgins, and the reviews were saying it was like one of the best of, recent times and possibly ever. We didn't know what we were doing enough that we like made it really good.
Well, it felt like very there's kind of 2 sides of Star Trek that I think everyone seems to enjoy. And again, I'm not speaking for the ultra passionate fans, but there's like that medieval, the medieval episode from the first season. And then there's also the courtroom scene, which is very reminiscent of the, is Data a human episode from Next Generation and stuff, and sort of those more heady, ethical episodes. And I think you guys threaded the needle on having that be not there's obvious allegories to our current day situation, but it didn't feel, preachy or pushy or anything like that. It felt like dead on Star Trek.
Absolutely, yeah. Credits to the writers on that. And my approach to that was to just basically get out of the way. I mean, there was definitely moments where I tried to make the wider shots beautiful and expressive and dark, because the Una character is in a really dark place, which is great that we get to get that deep in a sort of otherwise utopian show.
Right.
But it was really to just honor the character. And Valerie and I set up a lot of rules to the language of the episode, that like this equals family and togetherness, and this equals isolation and oppression and things like that. And I think that it was mostly invisible and helped the tone get across. So we had a great time on that. But
I just derailed that whole thing. Sorry, you were saying in this episode something about the lighting in the courtroom, or shit.
You can edit this.
Yeah, I'll cut out big pauses. What the fuck were we talking about? There was the light. Daylight versus nighttime in space, circadian rhythms, and then you said episode 2.
Okay, in episode 2, they're orbiting Earth, so it became, we're sort of Earth. We know this. There's a sun, right? And it's awake during the day and it's asleep at night. And even though we're like, but which side of Earth are they orbiting? Isn't the light going to shift every, 30 minutes or so? And it was like, we're just going to go with day is bright, night is dark, because it's sadly all we know. And to say, it's nighttime, and it's like hard light coming in. First of all, they do need to sleep, so they could just shut their windows, but that's boring too.
I don't think I've ever seen shutters or blinds in a Star Trek anything.
I do have what's called blast shields, which can be applied to the windows as a covering. And that does sometimes happen where they're like part of the way down, almost like as a shutter.
Right.
But the day-night thing I've accepted as a sort of convention, and we'll find a way to make it feel more moody at night.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's not just, well, maybe it is, switching the interior LEDs from 6500 to 3200 or 27 or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like turning a lot of things off. There was an episode where Uhura's sleeping, and we really wanted it to be like she's in deep sleep and she gets awoken, and she has a sort of rock lamp, this like super warm kind of source. I was like, I think that's just the source. So like, we accentuated everything with this amber kind of glow. And then when other lighting happens, it becomes a very stark difference.
Yeah.
Because there is a point at which if you want things to look super pretty, in quotes, all the time, you're turning everything on and it becomes this movie sleep or movie dark. And certain scenes need to go beyond that and feel like the character really is, almost in darkness.
Yeah. Is there any particular, obviously you have 2 more episodes coming out, right?
Yeah, episode 6 and episode 9.
How did they decide on the distribution of those? Because a couple of the people I've interviewed from other Star Treks, like they get grouped up. It's like 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7 or whatever.
They're doing blocks, and we don't do blocks. We alternate, but we also have 3 DPs. We had 3 DPs on season 2. It was me, Glenn Keenan, and Ian Anderson, who Ian Anderson was, I believe, on season 1, doing more second unit work, and now he's getting into the rotation. So he did 2, I did 4, and Glenn did 4. And they broke up this distribution partly because of the anomaly of the 3DP system, but also because of COVID. And there were certain episodes that we were all supposed to do, and then at one point Ian got COVID and Glenn had to cover him, and then vice versa. And then Ian had basically an emergency, like a medical sort of situation that wasn't serious, but ended up, he needed to be covered. So I was on my down period basically doing early prep on my 9th episode, and then I had to step in and shoot for him. I did his blend. So the interesting thing about the volume is there's always a very important day when the set is put in, because the sets have to be turned over episode to episode.
Right.
All the Unreal worlds are made, and they're there for you to essentially pre-light, which is what we call a blend, to make sure that the practical set and the 3D set looks right, and it can take all day. So we're always doing each other's blend because one person's either shooting or prepping or not available. It's rare you get to do your own blend, as they say. So we were all covering each other in various capacities. And just turns out that you need to have like an episode gap and switch from the evens to odds or vice versa. And Glenn did episode 1 and episode 10. So he was sort of had more time in the middle. So it's different from other shows where I've either alternated back and forth, and you're either the evens or the odds DP, or on some shows, I was just the sole DP. I was the only DP. And then you get very little prep, but it's kind of cool that you just like always shooting.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet that's pretty nice. I've never worked on, I was the second unit DP on one movie. That's all the like major stuff I've done. The rest of my shit's like corporate or music videos or whatever. So it's always fun to hear like because, you know, I've interviewed plenty of DPs who shoot an entire series just by themselves. And then like your situation where it's like 3 people.
Yeah, it's very much
educational.
Like, mostly there's an alternating block rhythm with what you call premium TV or streaming, where you do like 2 episodes at a time because they bring a director who does 2, and it's like a month of prep, a month of shooting, and it feels a little bit like indie feature rhythm. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's some that like do the whole show, and some that are just like pure episode to episode alternating.
Yeah. I did want to, when you were talking about the blend, it reminded me, I forgot to ask about the volume, because I think a lot of people are interested in that. And I do know that they don't get a lot of listeners on this podcast. It's like a few hundred. Maybe we're up to like 1,000. But I do know that a lot of them are the guests. So I've had to start asking higher level questions instead of thinking it was all beginners. But a lot of people are interested in the kind of nuts and bolts of working on the volume. And so I was wondering if simply how are you adding additional light to the system? Because obviously the LEDs if the LEDs were powerful enough to light everything, Kino wouldn't have made the Mimic. And then also, was there anything that when you started learning how to shoot on the volume that popped up that surprised you, or maybe that you would maybe want to warn another DP about?
Well, first of all, I said earlier, different shows do the volume in different ways, and you've got 2 Star Trek shows, Discovery and Strange New Worlds, both using the same volume space. It's one that like CBS built for these 2 shows. And what we do is we have an LED ceiling, and that's for like reflections. We do a lot of lighting within the ceiling, and we just embrace it as this sort of naturalistic element. And Discovery, one of the first things they do is they like rip out the ceiling and put in a lighting grid.
Oh, all right.
So there's 2 completely different approaches. I believe Mandalorian did a 360 volume, but that really messes with your sound, and you're ADRing all the sound. But when your lead wears a helmet, it's probably not a big deal, you know?
Right. Wait, it messes with your sound because it's echoey?
Because it's echoey, yeah. There's certain parts of our so we built a teardrop shaped volume. So we have an open end on the backside, and that helps for access of things. And also you really don't have the sound issues, at least not nearly as bad. So we embrace the like surround LED sort of experience and look. And we are doing a ton of lighting from the volume, walls, and ceiling. So you mentioned that like if the LEDs are bright enough, in my experience, they are.
Oh, cool.
The reason to do an augmented effect is basically like lighting ratios. So if you want something to play on somebody, but not really like wash out the floor, because if you're lighting from the walls or ceiling, it's going to be farther away. and it's going to influence a lot more. And even though they're not really directional, they're going to be soft sources, ambient sources. So if you don't want the effect on your surroundings, that's when you have to bring in something closer and contain it, or make the lighting ratios what you want. Because milking out the walls of the volume is always a concern.
Sure.
We put around the edge of our ceiling, like a black layer. Like we basically have call it a curved gradient, which we call the horseshoe because of the shape that it makes, just to make sure our walls aren't getting milked out from the ceiling itself. So it's that whole game of contrast versus, fidelity versus interesting lighting, things like that.
Right.
So we do use a lot of mapping, pixel mapping. We sometimes stick several sky panels or other sources up in the top of the wall, and they're mapping whatever ambient imagery we're seeing.
By pixel mapping, you mean like finding an XY coordinate for a color and putting it in the light?
Yeah, and like an RGB response.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So we could have, which we've done, like in Rigel 7, there's flame in the wall, meaning like in the 3D world. So spoiler, the gate of
the episode's out.
They're in these cages, and then the gate of the castle is in the wall, and there's flame, digital flame, in the 3D imagery. So we have sky panels above that, basically mounted at the top of the wall, mimicking the color and the flicker pattern of those digital flames.
Gotcha. Okay.
Sure. Influence into the set. Because of course, now you're playing the game of, if you have a digital flame, of course it's going to be exposed to be read on camera, and hence not bright enough to throw very far. So you have to augment it.
Right.
Which is the same thing as normal on-camera flame. If you see the color, then it's not doing a lot of lighting.
Well, and that kind of fits into what my other thought was like once you had mentioned that the LEDs were bright enough, my immediate thought was like, well, I guess you'd only really need to bring stuff in for effects, or if you were trying to mimic the sun, like a harder kind of directional type thing.
We do light our characters, and once again, it's because, all right, we really want to give them some shape here. And if I put a huge shape on the wall that's 40 feet away, it's just going to throw that light all over everything, which can be cool. So maybe I'll do a big shape for the world, and we will have directionality, but I'll also bring something physically in on the floor for the characters to give them, more heroic lighting or give them more contrast. That said, with the hard light comment, it's sort of, I don't know of a successful example where they've done a hard sunlight world on the volume, because you can't create a ubiquitous parallel sunlight that encompasses the whole volume.
Right.
Good. Let's say
that physics again.
Let's say you lined up a bunch of big hard fixtures in an array to sort of give you that, but now you're milking out the volume like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And are you really covering from one end to the other this hard sun? So it's physically, fucking
problematic.
Yeah. So another telltale sign of shooting on the wall is like, oh, it's magic hour forever. Because why not? Because why not, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great. But, hard light is really hard to do.
Sure.
It's another term for hard light, difficult light. Yeah. So all the Boba Fett desert stuff, I thought, oh, they'll probably do that in a volume. I was like, oh no, that's like in the desert.
No, they're hot.
Yeah, ouch.
Dude, I could not imagine wearing all that Mandalorian armor, even the fucking alien costumes, just having to be outside in Tunisia or wherever the hell they are.
Yeah, there's so much.
I guess they do have those NASCAR like cooling vests now. You know, they
do.
plug 'em in.
It helps a lot. Yeah. Very dedicated role to be covered in stuff all day.
For sure. Yeah, a buddy of mine works at Legacy Effects, and so he's done all the Star Warses, all the Marvels, you know, probably done a whole bunch. Actually, I know he's done a handful of Star Trek stuff, because every once in a while I'll see something and I'll take a picture of it, like, you know, and I'm like, is this you? And he goes, yeah. Motherfucker.
Yeah, we're talking with Legacy all the time.
Yeah, so that you probably have seen some of my friend Carrie's stuff. But I remember he started putting himself, I don't know, my joke is always that they're too rushed, so he has to, but I don't know what the situation is down there. But do you remember did you watch Obi-Wan?
Yeah.
So you met, you know, the dinosaur that like chases Obi-Wan like across the buildings, like the dinosaur, what's it called? Bounty hunter.
Uh-huh.
That's my friend Carrie. Like, he made the suit, and then because he was like tall enough for, like, he's about my height, he's a little shorter, and I guess the head looked normal on him, so he's like, I guess it's got to be me, and so he got to do the thing. It's fun.
Hey, that's a fun job to be a dinosaur,
right? I did want to ask, because I had seen it on your IMDb. Speaking of nerd shit, I got to know what was up with that Half-Life short.
Oh, that was I worked with a director named Joe Miali, and he was sort of big in the video game space. He ended up doing a really cool feature about like mecha robots coming and taking over and stuff. It was really cool. And so we got in a cool rhythm. We did a Assassin's Creed, basically like fan short, and this was in conjunction with Machinima.
Sure. R.I.P. Machinima.
Totally. So we did one for Assassin's Creed. We did one for Half-Life. We did some other stuff, which were like YouTube series pilots and stuff like that. So the Half-Life short was just a fan film that I think he wrote or co-wrote. And just, it was all his brainchild of like integrating some of the game, you know, features and iconic, you know, the crowbar, shit like that.
Right.
But we just did.
I actually have a crowbar for that exact reason.
We just did it for, you know, fun and for fans.
I didn't even think to look it up. I was like, well, that's probably something of course I could. Is it online somewhere? Is it on YouTube?
Yeah, I think it's there.
I should have just tried to, for whatever reason I saw it and I went, I got to ask about that, and didn't think to watch it, like try to go find it.
There were parts where we had the like crowbar POV because it kind of follows the crowbar. Like you go into scenes, but then like the crowbar goes different places and we follow it and we get to like see the whole Half-Life world. And so we rigged a GoPro to the crowbar and had it like bouncing around and do stuff. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. The did you play that game at all, or even like Assassin's Creed or anything, or is that kind of
not much
that brought to you? Yeah.
But I did my research and I know the worlds.
Sure. The other nerd thing I wanted to ask, which had nothing to do with the research, was I see you got the 3D printer back there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering because I had a printer for 7 years, and I do a lot of like, I'll print my own focus gears for like cameras that are lenses that don't, you know, stills lenses or whatever, or just like even accessories for my cameras. So question is, what do you use that for? Just for fun or for profit?
Well, that belongs to my wife, Connie, who is a visual artist.
Oh, hell yeah.
She went through a design degree at Art Center. And so she was laser cutting and doing all the stuff, model making, the whole thing. And now she's been using 3D printing for like multimedia visual art. So she's like using AI generated imagery with animations to like poetry. And then she has these 3D printed sculptures for like extruded from AI images. And she recently exhibited these in Paris and things like that. So she's like a multi-faceted, interesting person who uses every tool available to her. So she's mainly the 3D printer. And
Gotcha.
at one point I was really into gear. I had like Red camera. I still have like my own slider and like all the tools that I could get because I wanted to have them.
Right.
But more and more so, especially on like the bigger shows, I really just have to rely on the crew for their ingenuity. And I'm, like I said, stuck sort of like scratching my head about what am I going to do with 4 million LEDs and how I bring this episode to life, which is a new genre. You know, some of these have like never been done before in Star Trek. You'll see, especially later in this series, this season, there's genres that have not been done in any Star Trek show. So a lot of creative focus on that. And I've put my like screwdrivers away for the time being. Actually, recently I'm like always like cleaning out my garage or something. And I have my like AC pouch with all the tools, and I even have orange sticks and like actual film tools.
Right.
I can't.
Man, orange sticks. No one's using those.
Maybe I'm gonna change a mag, you know, and I still have my changing tent. And so I have this stuff and it's just like, I'm not using it a lot. One of my main tools I do still use is a laser pointer.
Yeah.
I feel like every time I don't bring it, shit, I need to like point at something. And now we're just that one? No, the other one. Do you mean the other one? So there's always like the tools you need, but I haven't been like constructing and printing and designing as much as diving into scripts and, you know, trying to interpret them.
Well, that's kind of the journey of professional, right? Is like it's always like gear and nitty gritty up until the point where someone else can do that. I was talking to another. It was like an interview like 2 days ago, where we were saying like that's the whole thing is you when you're on the indie side, you're like trying so hard to know everyone's job and like, you know, do everything to the best of your ability, and then when you finally, it's like being rich. Like you finally have money and now everyone wants to give everything to you for free. It's like, you know, everyone's jobs, you finally get there and now everyone else can do it for you. You just got a point.
There's a lot of irony to that, or, you know, the agents only call you when you don't need them anymore or something, you know, it's like,
right.
That's definitely not the case for me. I found a great agent who reached out to me after she saw Bone Tomahawk and thought it was really great and wanted to help me. And she's been instrumental, actually helped me connect with Strange New Worlds and things like that. So Tara Cromer is excellent. But that said, with the whole, you know, let your crew support you, I did, again, with my wife, who's extremely talented, we co-wrote and co-directed a feature on our own. And we lit up in Lake Arrowhead and we walked these trails, you know, like every week or multiple times a week, and the scenery is so beautiful. We wanted a story that we could capture our experience of living there in these really scenic places, all natural. So we developed a story about a man who's lost someone and needs to go into nature to like a legendary sort of mystical place where they could possibly reunite. So there's like the feeling of loss, and it's very internal, but it's also extroverted into nature as this sort of like healing, challenging place that we have to return to really like make sense of what our feelings are. So we shot this thing with almost no dialogue and a 10-person crew. It was basically all our friends.
Nice.
And all the exteriors, we did do some interiors, but all the exteriors, it was zero artificial lighting, no bounce board, just time of day and angles, you know, like if we want
no neg.
No.
All right.
Contrast. And it just kind of naturally worked, where it's like, we want some shape. It's like rotate 25 degrees. Now the backlight over here, the fill's over here, and this naturally falling off. And it's like, why are we even attracted to this? Because it just exists. So it was really an exercise in returning to the basic cosmic reason we like single sources and this kind of contrast and the way the sun dips over the atmosphere. We would wake up at 4 a.m. and go shoot magic hour and then take a nap and then shoot magic hour in the evening. Not every day, because that's like very long days. but
Right.
we take advantage of it when we could. And it was basically like Magic Hour, the movie, except we wanted this sort of like thriller plot. We were really inspired by Tree of Life and these sort of moody things, but we were like, we want a very singular story.
Yeah.
So we went out and did that all on our own, and that was wearing all the hats again. And I was like, I'm grabbing the easy rig and I'm doing the thing. I'm like digging and like creating a path to track somebody handheld down the woods and stuff. So, it was like, grab the shovel and here we go.
Hell yeah. Is that when's that gonna come out?
I mean, when it's done.
Well, yeah, I mean, fair enough. Yeah, no one's got the whip on you.
We purposely were like, okay, the pressure is low in order to, deliver that. We don't have anybody breathing down our necks except ourselves and everybody who collaborated. We want to get this out there, but it's been a great process because we get to grow along the way. We grow as we shoot it, and we're growing in the post-production process. Dabbling in editing some ourselves with like working with talented people. So it's helped me become a much better cinematographer, having gone through a feature film directing and everything process, instead of like generating the footage, which is still a very personal thing, but like handing it off and saying, we'll see you at the premiere, really taking it all the way and realizing how difficult it is to pull something off, but also like being sensitive to every aspect of it so that it makes you a better collaborator. And, we did that a few years ago. And I think Star Trek was probably my first like major project, having been through all those aspects. And I think I noticed my ability to collaborate better.
Yeah. I mean, I've always said that being an editor makes you a better DP. And over the pandemic, I started offering my services as colors because I was coloring all my own shit anyway. And I got like a handful of like documentaries and shorts and a couple features, and I wouldn't say that coloring makes you a better DP, but it certainly takes the pressure off when you're like, oh fuck, I don't know, I don't need to get a flag up here. I know I can take that down, with a window, versus going, they can do that, right? That kind of thing. But I assume, writing and directing and especially all that would make you a better all-arounder, or a better, as you're saying, collaborator.
I had this really weird experience in undergrad. I did my own film as a thesis, and I did every aspect of it. I wanted to collaborate with people along the way, but it was a story about, so I'm a classical cellist.
Oh, wow.
That was my introduction to like a creative headspace and lifestyle. My mother's a pianist and grandmother was a pianist, and I've just sort of been around it. That's how me and my wife met. She's a wonderful pianist.
That's amazing.
And the transition from classical music to cinematography was very direct for me because I went to film school and they handed me a Bolex and were like, all right, here's a light meter, go figure this stuff out. I didn't know photography at all. And I had done illustration, and ironically, my grandfather was like a commercial illustrator. So that aspect of my life was also sort of there, but I hadn't practiced with a camera. So I learned like what an f-stop was shooting motion pictures. So I holding this Bolex, I was like, okay, this is my instrument. And now I got to learn the technicals, like the exposure and the angles and the framing and this sort of stuff. And lo and behold, you can create some meaning out of it, and the audience gets an emotional response. And I was like, I know how to do that.
Right.
With a musical instrument. So cinematography to me has always been visual music. It has to be rhythmic. It has to have phrasing. It has to, build up and have harmony or dissonance and things like that. So, it's like light on dark, dark on light is sort of like building a chord to me. What was I talking about?
Oh, well, I'll say I'm nodding emphatically because I grew up in music. I'm a drummer, but I learned how to play guitar. But one question I always ask DPs when I hear that they come from a musical background is, how do you, because I can't articulate it, but you've just done it for me, which is why I was snapping my own neck, is like, how does music and cinematography or even filmmaking match? Because I always end up trying to, like, I'll show someone a song and I'll be like, this is like filmmaking, and they're like, that's what do you mean? It's like, that's not a score. And I'm like, no, like the feeling. the way that it doesn't return to its own chorus. I don't know. That's filmmaking.
Sure. Yeah, I would edit my reel for, I don't know, a couple weeks or something, and I'd spend 6 months trying to find the right song.
Oh, it's the worst part.
But I was saying that because I had this weird experience in undergrad where I made this film. It was very personal to me. I wanted somebody to help me write it, but they couldn't understand this because it was just so internal. And I wanted somebody to direct it. I didn't even want to direct it. I just really wanted to put it together and shoot it. It was about a violinist who was struggling with music and realized that music was so much more than what they were playing and being taught. So it was their sort of coming of age creatively, which was, mimicking my own life in doing the film itself. Very meta.
Right, what you know.
So I ended up doing all these roles. I definitely didn't want to edit it. Ended up editing it myself. Worked with a composer to do the score and all this stuff. And in the undergrad, I went to Temple University in this sort of like final film festival. It won best script, best directing, best score, best editing, no cinematography. And I'm like, you're telling me to do everything else. It was a strange experience, but I think that when I do my own project, I'm really just invested in the storytelling. And I don't know that the cinematography suffered, but I guess it just like wasn't inherently as like gravitating to that specific audience. So similarly, when we did this feature film, I definitely made it a point of like having the cinematography shine, but it's just holistically telling a story. And I do think that makes you better at one particular craft when you've had your hand in all of them.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine the reason I don't think every DP wants to be a director, but I think good DPs understand directing, you're the visual storyteller, as everyone always likes to say. So I imagine if you're focused on directing, especially as a student, you're getting the shots that work, not necessarily the shots that'll win you an award. You're not thinking pretty, you're thinking functional.
And credit to the ASC, I did the cinematography program at AFI. And when I was shooting my thesis film there, I specifically was like, all I want to do is tell a great story. That's why I went to this program. They're teaching you great technicals, and there's a lot of like super talented cinematographers coming into that program. Actually, a lot of my peers from that year.
A lot of people on this podcast.
Yeah, Autumn Durrell and Todd Van Hazel and Matt Lloyd and all these guys. They're just really shooting some of the world's top projects. And we all were in the trenches together. But on my thesis, I was specifically just trying to tell a story like, let's go Moody. I don't know. I don't want to win an award. I just want to tell the story. And it ended up like, I ended up winning this ASC, graduate award. And Michael Goy was the president of the ASC at the time, and he called me, and I was sort of shocked. And he said, when we watched everybody's things, it always comes down to a very close match. Sometimes we even have to rewatch and re-rate people's projects fresh, competing against each other. And they said, we ended up deciding yours was the winner because it really supported the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's always been my approach, that it's narrative over, pretty images. Of course, you want to think your images are pretty. And I think that when you're telling the story, they become that, But that's been my personal approach. And the multifaceted background and things like that, I think, are always coming into play, the visual music and all that. So, that's my 3D printer story.
Well, to your point about like, visual music and stuff, and that I think the shot becomes pretty, because I think a standard pretty shot is boring. Like we all think of the same pretty shot, but if it's the right shot, I'm going to articulate this better. I've said a million times on this podcast that like technically correct sucks. and feeling is always going to win. Like even if the shot is technically incorrect, if it feels correct for the moment, it'll always win out. And that's same. I didn't sleep last night because I watched your shit and then I watched 3 more movies, so my brain's half slow.
Oh, I love it. That sounds like you're in a creative flow.
Yeah, a bit. That's what I was gonna say when you were mentioning at the very beginning of this conversation, when we were talking about time taking in and time releasing. Have you heard of Stephen Coulter? Wrote a whole book on flow states. And I guess he's standing on the shoulders of giants, but there's a whole series of books on flow states, and
that's like how I live.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah, it's like you're following your inspiration from one thing to another, and like trying to ride the crest, if you will, of your inspiration along the way, and it makes doing your taxes even harder.
Yeah, dude,
because you're just like, oh my gosh, this is so far below my inspiration at this moment.
Yeah, April always seems to be peak. I don't want to be here time. Well, now we got till October, which I certainly took advantage of. I was like, no fucking way, I'm going to NAB.
I really can't remember what that meal was that you're trying to write off.
Luckily, I am self-employed and I got QuickBooks self-employed, and I'm good at on the app going like where I was, what I did. I write a little note. Otherwise, you're 100% right. Yeah.
Yeah, flow state is definitely become my lifestyle as much as I can keep it there. And I think that's, you feel the creativity flowing from you instead of feeling like you're chasing it. And that's definitely, I was in periods of my creative career earlier where I felt like I was chasing. Like if I need to do the stuff I need to do first, and then I can be in a headspace.
Right.
Like
that's the worst.
Let the inspired headspace sort of take you where you need to go, and everything will, get there. And hopefully the IRS doesn't come arrest you.
Yeah, that whole if there's so many versions of that people go through. Can't remember what, I think it's, what is it, The War of Art, the Stephen Pressfield book. Maybe it's too many Stevens. Anyway, is talking about resistance and stuff, but the worst version of resistance is when people go like, oh, all I need to do is first I'll go to this retreat and then I'll be a good whatever. First once I can get into USC, then I'll be a good filmmaker. And it's like, nope, you just got to just do it now. When that crest comes and that flow state hits you. Flow state's like the second level of being present and meditative, right? Like once you're present and you're not thinking too hard about everything else, you're open to the idea of the flow state hitting you, and you can catch that proverbial wave.
Totally. Talking about, that if then, something I saw a lot, continuing to shoot, because DPs, it's as hard as anything when you're getting started. It's like, how do you show people that, they should work with you, or, how do you get to work with the people you want to?
Right.
But it is, at least starting out, I think, highly technical, and you get to shoot more than a director, and something that I would see is like directors wanting to be directors and like not producing content, like not producing shorts. It's like, if you want to practice the art of directing, it's like, go grab that DSLR and cut something together. You don't have to show it to anybody, but you can do it. So it's similar in cinematography, I feel, where, once I learn this, or I've had experience on this, then I can shoot. And it's like, well, I think it's always starting from the bottom, no matter what.
Yeah.
If you want to shoot, because, hey, phones look great now.
Well, that's the thing I was because we've mentioned a few times on this podcast, like various DPs, have echoed the telling students or people just getting into it, like, oh, if you need to start and you're strapped for cash, use your phone. And I will always, especially online, see a lot of resistance to that. People saying, oh, you just don't get it. No one's going to take it seriously. That's you're being naive. And I'm always like, no, you're being not naive, whatever, uneducated on the issue. The issue is you need to fail a lot first. The price to entry is failing a lot first, and you might as well not spend $15,000 on a camera package to just fail first, and then we'll talk about the camera.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was a period where I was really close to buying an Arri 35 III. I was like, oh, I want to shoot high speed and I want to shoot 35. I was like, yeah, well, if I spend, I don't know what it was. It was a pretty good deal. I was like $15,000 or something for that and the lens, and like, oh, maybe I should do this. I was like, well, then what am I going to put in front of the camera?
Right.
So I think instead I did a short and shot it either like on a DVX or something that I could get my hands on. And that's the truth, especially acting. I think that sometimes, not always, but sometimes I get, my motto is good cinematography is great acting on screen.
Yeah.
If you've got
great
to the
production
point,
department.
if you've gotten to the point where the acting is stellar, you're probably in a quality product or project, and you know how to light them. And it's like, how do you support what they're doing? And of course, if it looks technically better and achieves the story goals, it's gonna be a better result than if it's technically worse. It's not to say the technicals are nothing, but there's still like the primary skill is the emotional interpretation and the support of that. But to really honor what the actors are doing and make the technical process work for them, I think is a huge part of doing, even on Star Trek, which is a very technical show.
Yeah.
Being attuned to what the actors are doing, I think that fans love the show because of that aspect, because they love the writing and they love the acting, and shooting it is going to happen one way or another, but shooting in a way that elevates the project is the emotional flow state.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the, I think like many people, I'm a big fan of David Fincher, and I've been lucky enough to interview like 4 DPs now that have worked with him. And I finally, after, doing my dumb nerd research and talking to those people, realized that the entire process of his, it's a little neurotic, but the entire process is literally just centered on actors. Like everything else everything else is optimized to acting. And people like to talk about his cinematography and stuff. I'm like, yeah, it looks great, but really it's quite simple. It's very simple. It's like, it's the same 4 shots over and over again. It's the same lighting setups over and over again. It's literally, one guy was saying that for House of Cards, the entire camera package had to fit in a Sprinter van, and they needed to be up and ready within 15 minutes of arrival. Like acting time now, which goes exactly what you're saying.
Sure. Bring out the neg fill. Let's go.
Yeah. Gotta go. Yeah. Neg fill and one Kino tube. That was the other thing I've noticed is a lot of neg and one Kino tube.
Yeah, you gotta give them the pop in the eye,
No, behind scratch.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. An invisible, the trick was an invisible scratch. Like it wouldn't be too punchy, but yeah. Well, I have kept you far longer than I intended, but this conversation's been great, and I'd love to have you back on. I don't know, maybe at the end of the season where you can have back on, talk about whatever. Sure. Oh, maybe you won't have had shot something by then because strike. But
well, let's keep in touch. You may want to pick my brain about this egg I'm gonna hold in front of your face, but not show you what's inside of this mystery episode that's never been done.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be something people talk about. So let's go back on that, and then I would love to shoot something at some point this year.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get to that.
I flew to Toronto, prepped a season that was gonna start in May. Didn't shoot it, and now I'm sitting here talking about shooting it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Hopefully by the time this episode comes out, that will have been resolved.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the extra time, man. It was really awesome to chatting with you. And like I said, the show's fucking great. You guys you're running on all cylinders.
Thank you, man. Appreciate the support.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by Pro Video Coalition. As this is an independently funded podcast, we rely on support from listeners like you. So if you'd like to help, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/frameandrefpod. We really appreciate your support, and as always, thanks for listening.